On the fifth day of traveling, after they had a brief conversation about Arda's uncanny hunting skills, which were mostly logical deductions, but whatever, and how he was going to be the one hunting from now on, they were arriving close to Coltus again. "We should definitely avoid it," Blake said, peering into the distance with hand binoculars. Tall buildings and translucent, winding roads shimmered faintly in the distance, past the rural areas on the outside next to the forest. A few seemed to be freshly, partially collapsed from the magnitude 10 earthquake a few days ago. It was barely noticeable due to the snow and the clouds, but still a distinct figure on the horizon. "We don't know what the situation with the Imperialists are, but if it were me, I would offer them temporary refuge in a safe bunker near the edge of the city. There's quite a few. They're technically our hostages and prisoners of war after all, even though they are probably walking around freely, since they nearly outnumber us. And despite the apocalypse, we do honor the Kelicon treaties." "The Kelicon treaties?" Arda echoed. "Basically treaties signed before the apocalypse that agreed to, respect some international humanitarian laws. Anyway, Norspheres are the main group that still follows it. The Nomads don't really wage war with anyone, so I guess they follow it too. The South Spheres are complicated, and the New Imperialists just don't." Somewhat like the Geneva Convention, Arda figured. Blake returned to scanning cultists in the distance. "So, anyways, I think they've gotten here maybe 2 days ago. They probably contacted the Emperor already and are setting up a meeting to discuss the hostages. I just hope Karato will remember to find a strategic location and bring Loris with him. He has no sense of time. And if the Imperialists attacked them suddenly..." Arda was half tempted to just tell Blake to go back and set up the meeting himself. "I would agree that we should stay a good distance from the city, but we need resources." "No, you need resources. Because I'm a perfectly self-sustaining, functional being." Was that humor I heard? Blake turned around so fast Arda was afraid for his neck's integrity. "Actually, don't answer that. You'll just say that it's simply fact and everything. That was close, though. Not as close as the freezing flying burrito thing, but close. You'll never forget that, won't you?" "Nope." In the end, they decided to stay in the relative safety of the forest, watching cultists carefully from afar. They saw a patrol go by a few times, but no one came close to them. As for resources for Blake... "I'll survive," he had said. Arda gave him a look. "Don't worry about me. Come on. It's not too bad. Besides, you have your original clothes, so I could just use the ones you have right now as a spare." Arda had sighed and given in, seeing as Blake was stubborn enough that no amount of logical persuasion could get through to him. Even if he was proven very wrong, he could bear the embarrassment and just keep going with his actions if he still believed them to be right. Blake was bright, but that was only when he wasn't being an idiot. Besides, there's a town a few kilometers south of Coltus. Blake watched the city carefully through the trees. They were taking turns keeping an eye out for patrols or scavenger parties, which would theoretically be more frequent with the increased number of people they had to take care of. To be honest, it might not even be standing, but it's worth a try. It's right at the cliff next to the coast. Professor T used to live there, I believe. North Cove, I think it was called. How big is the town? If it was just a few kilometers south of Coltus on the coast, then it would have been affected by the earthquake too, in which case it was most likely that it didn't survive the shock. After the level 10 earthquake, brand new ravines and rifts had formed next to the ocean, causing landslides and chunks of the cliffs to fall into the ocean. Arda and Blake had seen an astonishing amount of them the past few days. Once they nearly got caught by a landslide during an aftershock. Or maybe it was a normal earthquake. It was impossible to tell. And after that, they decided to put some distance between them and the coast before heading south again. If the town was on the cliff directly next to the coast, there was a high chance that a large portion of it had fallen into the ocean, or landed in the bottom of a new rift that split it in half. It's a modest town, Blake answered, though part of it had eroded and ended up lost in the ocean. And after that level 10, well, you know what? It's very probable that it just disappeared off the face of Zeta, but we can as well try. It took them another day and a half to arrive at North Cove, and when they did, it really was, unfortunately, absolutely decimated. The forest had given way to a large, expanding plain of snow some kilometers back, leaving them exposed and out in the open. Leagues of bright white nothingness stretched around them, only broken by the cliffs in the distance to their left, and cultists some ways away at their 5 o'clock. The wind pulled at their clothes, and the thermal blanket that Blake had taken to wear as a cloak over his head, making the trek more annoying than anything else. Without the protection of the trees, they were left to endure the cold without any source of warmth other than themselves, and nowhere relatively safe to camp in. The snow was also thick, and with each step they sank up to their knees, so they just kept going, without stopping, using their bridge gliders as walking sticks. Blake didn't speak a word, conserving his energy, but Arda kept glancing over at him, worried. Surely the blonde was tired. He was only human. He didn't have more well-defined muscles from all the time he ran up buildings for fun, but even compared to that, this was tiring. They were running on rationed food, and to add to that, it was cold. Blake didn't do anything to indicate he was bothered, and Arda couldn't see much of his facial features behind his mask and goggles. He swore that he caught a grimace once in a while, however. Not that he was staring at the blonde. No, absolutely not. And he wasn't lying to himself. The first sign of the town was invisible. Distance was senseless in the endless expanse of white snow, and they would have completely missed the entire town if the stirrup of Blake's bridge glider hadn't caught on something and he fell straight forward, face planting in the snow with a soft "ah!" and nearly knocked Arda down with him. Arda turned, sighed, and planted his bridge glider in the thick snow before bending down and pulling Blake up. He thought this was just another one of Blake's clumsy moments, but when Blake stood up and shook the snow off, he pulled up his bridge glider, and a long, narrow piece of wood suddenly dislodged itself from where it was buried in the snow. The stirrup had caught the end of it where it was splintered. Arda stared, then looked around. Hang on. He grabbed his bridge glider and started dragging it through the snow in a random direction, which would have been difficult if he wasn't an immortal, not quite human being. It wasn't long before it hit something unnatural, and he stepped on something as well. He stuck his hand in it and pulled it out. It was what looked like a peg, but he could tell it belonged to the leg of a table or a chair, or maybe even a bed frame. He dragged his feet through the snow and patted around before pulling out something else. A torn, frozen blanket, shrunken. Yep, Blake's voice called to him from behind. We're at North Cove, all right. Arda turned to find Blake, who dragged out a large sign that said something about voting someone for the mayor of North Cove. Then he spotted something behind Blake as well. Looks like it's been flattened, Blake sighed. Honestly, I shouldn't have been surprised. It's a miracle cultist has survived this long. What are you looking at? Blake turned around. There were footprints, barely visible and mostly covered up by the snow, but there. It led south, and even Arda wouldn't have noticed it if he wasn't looking for irregularities beneath the snow. Someone was here before us, Arda said, and very recently. Who the heck would wander this far from cultists in the forest? Blake mused out loud. Well, unless it's not a Norsphere. Escaped imperialist, Arda suggested. They might have slipped out or ran away when the earthquake hit. It's most likely. Blake nodded. One way to find out. They followed the tracks, which was getting more and more difficult by the second. Snow fell relentlessly, and they were facing headwind the whole trek, which only served to hinder their progress. The tracks disappeared behind them as they followed it. It didn't seem to end. They occasionally were met with more debris underfoot, but it was to be expected by that point. At some point, Arda glanced over his shoulder and found that the forest was just a vague, dark line in the horizon, and cultists had completely disappeared. Other than that, it was just a field of white dust. "Hey, Arda," Blake called, and he looked back. Blake was pointing at a long range of hills just up ahead, nearly invisible against the gray, cloudy sky, and the only indication it existed was the shades of gray that perceived a difference in depth. The natural structure stretched diagonally, going southwest. "Snowdrift, and we're heading straight for it." Arda nodded and pulled out his gun. The footsteps went straight up the snowdrift, and if the culprits really were there very recently, they might be behind it, perhaps having dug in on the other side to rest. It would be the only suitable place to do so for hundreds of meters in all directions. Blake had pulled out his own gun, his left hand supporting himself using the bridge glider as they walked toward the hill. They didn't need to slow their steps or try to be cautious, as the wind muffled their footsteps quite well. They headed up the snowdrift, following the tracks where the hill suddenly ended in an abrupt, steep slope. Arda went forward a few steps, peering over. There, indeed, was a group of people, huddled at the foot of the hill, in a small dugout groove in the snow, talking with their heads together. 7 people, just about. They were all in bad shape, though they didn't seem to be short on resources just yet. Dried meat was being passed around, and some drank from canteens, but they were all shivering, rubbing their ears and feet to prevent frostbite, sitting with backs pressed together. All of them had orange scarves, which were pulled around their heads, some covering their mouths and noses. Arda turned to Blake and leaned closer so he wouldn't need to shout. "Imperialists, 7 of them." Blake frowned. 7? Are you sure? He gave the blonde a look. Okay, Mr. Computer Cellist. You don't make mistakes when it comes to math, but 7 is too big a group to go missing for Krato not to notice. Are they the guards who were on top of Jokin Cliff? Arda thought, but shook his head. No, they don't have the same equipment. Different rifles and guns. They had too many resources for the possibility that they left the cliff in a hurry. They seemed more like a scavenging patrol more than anything else. A scavenging patrol? Here? Blake looked around. He scratched his head with the back of his gun, which made Arda a little concerned. Should we just move past them? I don't think that's a smart idea, Arda said. It's not a matter of avoiding a confrontation, but what if they launch an attack or a rescue mission in cultists when they head back? Oh, right. As much as I hate to admit it, you have a point, Blake muttered. Even with 7 people, they could break the Imperialists out if they had the element of surprise. Sector 8 is scarce on members willing to wield a gun or head outside at all. We've always had to spread thin. It's risky to just leave them, and we also have nothing to do, so why not? Arda said, before he could stop himself. No, we're just out here freezing to death for fun. He paused, shocked at his own statement, then quickly added, Let's flank them. They didn't seem to be in any shape to put up a fight. Ask them about where they're heading and why. At their close distance, Arda could clearly see the muscles in Blake's face contort to a grin behind his mask. Arda looked away before the blonde could say anything stupid. I'll take the right. Okay, mister, Blake consented, the smile apparent in his voice. Then I'll get the signal when to drop down.